A gruesome discovery took place in Egypt some years ago. You want to hear about it? 16 human hands, carefully buried in 4 eerie pits. They didn't look too much like human hands at first, since they were abnormally large, but they were. Weirdly, there were only right hands, no left hands were in sight. It turned out that it points to the practice of an ancient dark ritual. Old Egyptian art and tales talked of a ceremony where warriors would present the right hand of their adversaries as proof of victory and ask for gold in return. Egyptians believed in the afterlife, so cutting off someone's hand meant you cut off their power eternally. Guaranteeing this type of defeat was interesting to the winning party. Here, the fight was between Egyptians versus Hyksos, who lived in what was once known as Canaan. Egypt has always been the center of some history-changing findings, and some time ago, this papyrus was found. If we stretched it open, it would be just a tad bigger than the height of a skyscraper. The world's tiniest skyscraper, which is located in Wichita Falls, Texas. When humans didn't write on their notes app, they wrote on this thing, made from the medulla of a papyrus plant. Around 2,000 years ago, ancient Egyptians wrote something reminiscent of a book where they describe most of their funerary traditions and their visions of the afterlife. It's considered one of the most important texts from ancient Egypt and is still sold in bookstores to this day. This ancient manuscript was unearthed from a chamber located just south of the Pyramid of Djoser, located in Sakara. Oh yes, Djoser is the oldest pyramid in Egypt and not the Giza pyramids like most people think. So recently, the site of Sakara buzzed with excited archaeologists who probably found one of Egypt's oldest complete mummies. They believe that this beautiful and well-preserved mummy was that of a wealthy man. He was discovered in a deep shaft, covered in layers of gold leaves. There are many symbols that show he was an important and wealthy man, like the band he wore on his head, the bracelet on his chest, and the fact that he was embalmed with a tunic, which was reserved for Egypt's finest. The most exciting part of the entire discovery was finding the resting place sealed with mortar, just as the ancient Egyptians had left it 4,300 years ago. Now this may sound weird, but back in 2008, archaeologists discovered a missing pyramid. Now it went missing because it deteriorated over the span of 4,000 years. Today, you can only see its base. It was a pretty important site back in ancient times. It is said that around the area of the pyramid, the ancients hosted a special type of ceremony where high priests would carry mummified remains of sacred bulls. Now here's a fun fact. Ancient Egyptians believed that Apis bulls were earthly incarnations of the city deity of Memphis and was connected to rites of fertility. It wasn't just any Apis bull though. They needed to be all black with a single white mark between its horns and a bunch of very specific characteristics. They were selected by the local priests and honored until they passed away. After that, they were mummified and buried in underground galleries. Meanwhile, this missing pyramid sort of disappeared around the 1800s. It was a German archaeologist who first found it in the village of Sakara. He called it the Headless Pyramid when he first found it. But then, years after the official discovery, the desert sand came along and covered the whole thing. There were some excavations between the 19th and 20th centuries, but they weren't too systematic. That's why scientists were so thrilled when they dug an entire pyramid's base after removing the 25-foot mound of sand that was covering it. Oh, and it turns out American archaeologists are excavating a cemetery in Egypt that could contain over 1 million mummified bodies. So far, archaeologists have dug around 1,700 mummies. One of the main differences from other classic Egyptian mummies is that these people weren't kings and pharaohs. They were commoners that most likely lived about 1,500 years ago, when Egypt was controlled by the Roman and Byzantine empires. The name of the cemetery is cool though, the Way of the Water Buffalo, just in case you want to check it out on your next trip. Other than bulls and buffaloes, ancient Egyptians also liked baboons. Are you seeing a pattern here? In the beginning of the 20th century, archaeologists discovered a site filled with mummified baboons in a place called, guess what? The Valley of Monkeys. An animal wouldn't have been mummified if it wasn't considered important. Certain animals were more important than others, since they were linked to specific deities. Jackals were connected to Anubis, the ancient god of the afterlife, and cats were likened to the female deity Bastet. Baboons were a pretty big deal, since they were believed to be connected to Thoth, the deity of wisdom and advisor to Ra, one of Egypt's supreme deities. The archaeologists who studied these animals weren't too happy. They think these baboons were kept inside and were deprived of sunlight for most of their lives. They had extreme vitamin D deficiencies and they were poorly fed. Maybe Thoth got angry with these baboon keepers. Just a guess. Since there's never a boring day for archaeologists in Egypt, they also found human mummies with golden tongues. Since Egyptians were all about the afterlife, they believed that golden tongues might help a person speak once they pass to the other side. I mean, it's a long shot, but hey, why not? Some of these mummies were placed in wooden coffins with goods, such as necklaces, pottery, golden artifacts in the shape of lotus flowers, and scarab beetles, and iPhones. Just kidding. A new temple was also unearthed recently in Egypt. Scientists believe it was dedicated to honor Zeus Cassios. That deity would be a cross between Zeus, the almighty Greek deity of the sky, and Mount Cassios. While digging around the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt, archaeologists spotted 2 pink granite columns poking out of the ground, and bingo. They believe these columns represented the temple's front gate and collapsed during an earthquake many years ago. And speaking of deities, there weren't only super serious deities. Recently, scientists unearthed a golden ring in a city south of Cairo. No, Frodo, it's not magical. It was a normal gold ring, but it had the depiction of the deity of fun, officially named Bes. This deity is often described in sacred texts as a happy chubby dwarf. Today, many tattoos we get are sorta deprived of any sense and are made of aesthetic purposes only. In ancient Egypt, though, women would get tattoos as a token of protection for childbirth. That's what scientists think, at least. Around the Nile region, scientists found some mummies that had well-preserved tattoos, which is a rarity since the skin deteriorates so easily. 2 of these women tattooed their lower backs, and the drawings were simple. They were mostly pictures, including that same chubby dwarf we just talked about, Bes. He also had a side hustle as the protector of women during childbirth. Now, would you believe me if I told you ancient Egyptians invented robots? No? Well, that's because that's not entirely true. Sure, they were astronomers, mathematicians, and engineers, and somehow they also squeezed an eccentric invention into that package – an automated deity some scientists called Hathor. This wooden statue had been in the Metropolitan Museum of Art for years before someone noticed its secret. With the help of an X-ray machine, specialists discovered a mechanical operating system inside it. The pulley-like axis goes from the statue's shoulder to her left leg. When the system rotates, the statue raises and lowers her hand. Hey, pick me! Pick me! I got my hand up! Are we really by ourselves in the universe? It's a daunting question that's been haunting us for centuries. No wonder scientists have tried to come up with all sorts of ideas as to why. One of the strangest theories concerning our lack of contact with other life forms is named the dark forest theory. Let's start small. Well, sort of. We'll focus on our Milky Way for now to better understand this theory. Our cosmic neighborhood is a galactic wonderland, sprinkled with 200 billion twinkling stars and maybe around 100 billion planets. So let's get hypothetical for a moment and say a tiny part of those habitats hosts life. Further, out of those life-bearing planets, a few might have evolved into intelligent beings. Given that, you'd think we'd be knee-deep in weird-looking neighbors, some of whom might be actively trying to find us or might just be out there, waiting to be discovered. Now, let's put a little science into this science fiction scenario. We have something called the Drake equation, which is a kind of universal roll call that estimates how many smart civilizations could pop up in our galaxy. You can think of this equation as the super smart roadmap. By playing around with a few important factors, the equation hints that there should be around 20 civilizations just in our galactic backyard. So why haven't we stumbled upon any yet? This theory isn't an easy task. It's a mixed bag of multiple variables, like the average number of planets per solar system that could potentially host life, or the rate at which stars suitable for intelligent life are formed. A tricky part here is that astronomers have yet to solidify the exact values of these variables, which means our calculations are just approximations for now. But back to the Milky Way, shall we? Feed in our hypothetical assumptions, crunch the numbers, and you get at least 20 civilizations. Yet somehow, our cosmic switchboard remains weirdly silent. How come? This radio silence has its own name too, the Fermi paradox, named after the guy who first thought, "Hey, where is everybody?" over 50 years ago. Since then, we've had a lot of different theories trying to solve this mystery, all tinkering with different aspects of the Drake equation. Some folks think the appearance of life is a rare event. Others think that getting from bacteria to advanced beings is the tricky part. Yet, some reckon that civilizations might either wipe themselves out after a short lifespan or never even get to invent something they could communicate with. But there's one theory that tops all others in its creepiness: the dark forest theory. According to it, the universe is a huge cosmic version of a haunted forest. And other types of creatures are out there, playing a game of hide and seek. They're intentionally keeping silent. Why? Well, the dark forest theory was best explained in a sci-fi novel, and the rationale goes something like this. For starters, every life form wants to stay alive. I'll buy that. If we go with that assumption, it's impossible to be sure whether other life forms might harm you if they get the chance. So, the safest bet is to take them out before they find the right time to do the same to you. Frankly speaking, it's the universe's version of the survival of the fittest. In this scenario, making contact with others becomes the most dangerous game, as it could lead to your location being traced and you being wiped out. How human. This results in everyone keeping quiet, a kind of universal shush, where every civilization tries to hide in utter cosmic silence. But hey, is this just an idea good for a thrilling novel, or does it have some real-world implications? Well, the theory was suggested by scientist David Brin as a possible explanation for the lack of radio evidence for non-Earth-like life. He went as far as imagining it would be robots that would do the dirty work of wiping out civilizations. But how realistic is this theory anyway? Well, it doesn't require us to assume a lot of stuff about the behavior of all foreign civilizations. Just one advanced race behaving this way could explain our observed reality. And it might explain why we've not picked up any advanced radio chatter despite a century of eavesdropping. It's possible that other creatures like us are too terrified of being noticed and have gone radio silent on purpose. But, and it's a big but, like mine, it does base itself on the notion that other species share our level of risk aversion and logic, or that there's a rogue civilization out there, picking off anyone they perceive as a threat. And that's a pretty significant assumption. If that doesn't sound creepy, this next piece of information certainly will. For about a century now, we've been shouting our existence into the cosmos. If this theory proves to be correct, every other civilization within 100 light-years of us might be getting our signals and knowing exactly where we are. And if we have reasons to hide from them, as suggested by some like Stephen Hawking, we might already be in trouble. But what if this theory isn't true? What if, sooner than we'd like to imagine, weird galactic creatures will indeed try to reach us? The truth is, most of us wouldn't even know what to do. Hey, let's not get over ourselves. In fact, some scientists are tackling this issue head-on. For the first time since the 1980s, specialists are trying to cook up a how-to guide for when we inevitably bump into cosmic neighbors. For instance, some researchers believe we've got to do more than just worry about how these life forms could shake up our world. If they send any type of radio signals down here, we've got to think about our reply. What are we going to say? Hey, we're humans. Nice to meet you. Absolutely not. We've got to do better than that. See, the only plan we've had till now came from a rough blueprint dating from 1989. This guide is a bit wishy-washy on what to do when the entire world gets the outer worldly text. Mostly it says, hey, let's share the news with everyone. But then what? If we confirm it's legit, officials will need to ask the United Nations for advice. But hey, does the United Nations even have a plan? Maybe, who knows? We've been doing loads of space exploring lately. Some say we've stumbled upon water on Mars. Others are sure we've spotted some planets that could be twins to Earth. So, the idea of finding life elsewhere isn't that far-fetched. But even after 100 years of trying to chat with cosmic beings, it's still a one-sided conversation. This new protocol isn't just about chatting up outsiders. It's also going to act as our cosmic voicemail, checking messages from outer space. It aims not just to decode the external lingo. It's also planning to figure out what these messages could mean for us. The plan is also to draft reports about how different policies could impact us and set up guidelines on how to respond to these space texts. So, will we ever get a message from our cosmic mates? Only time will tell. But what we do know is that we just can't wing it. We can't be caught off guard and start a planet-wide frenzy when we get that otherworldly WhatsApp. We gotta have a plan, and we gotta have it ready for when we're face-to-face with the real deal. I mean, we've come across a lot of potential such sightings, but none of them proved to be genuine. On that note, U.S. authorities checked over 100 cases of weird stuff going on in the skies. I'll spare you the details, but not one green creature was ever found. More like drones and similar stuff floating around. So, as we stand on the cusp of this potentially game-changing event, we must strive to be prepared. Whether our intergalactic neighbors drop us a text tomorrow or centuries from now, we need a plan. After all, this could change everything we know about our universe and our place within it.
From the tiniest ants to the mightiest galaxies, why do things work the way they do? If we imagine the universe as a giant puzzle, we already found some important pieces: electromagnetism, gravity, tiny particles, and so on. But even with all this, we can't get the full picture. We still can't figure out how everything works. What we're trying to find is the theory of everything. This is the mysterious theory that should be able to fit everything in our world together. For years, brilliant minds like Isaac Newton, Albert Einstein, Niels Bohr, and many others tried to derive this theory. But as you can imagine, it's not a simple task. Albert Einstein was one of the first to get very close to the answer. He spent his entire life watching and analyzing the world. As a result, he came up with his most famous equation, E equals mc squared. This equation tells us how energy and mass are connected. Energy can turn into matter and vice versa. But that's not enough, so he created his theories of relativity. One was called special gravity. It says nothing can go faster than light, and time can stretch or shrink depending on how fast you're moving. Then, he combined it with general relativity, which introduced gravity into the equation. He thought of gravity as the universe's way of bending space and time. Just like a fabric stretches when you place a heavy ball on it, space-time stretches when we place things like planets in it. This effect is what we call gravity. Einstein also wanted to connect gravity with the other forces, like electricity and magnetism. That way, everything could be together in harmony. And there were scientists who decided to help him with that. Their names were Theodore Kaluza and Oskar Klein. In the 1920s, they decided that it would be cool to add extra dimensions to our universe. Electromagnetism explained how electricity and magnetism work together. And now, Einstein, Kaluza, and Klein wanted to add relativity to it, like mixing several flavors of ice cream to create a super delicious universe sundae. To make this wild idea work, Kaluza and Klein had to add a whole new dimension to our world. We usually think of our world as having 3 dimensions, like length, width, and height, plus time. But these scientists created the 5th dimension, although it's all tiny and hidden, so you couldn't spot it in your everyday life. All this gave us a more or less full picture of the world. Many even thought that Einstein did it, found the theory of everything. But if only things were that simple. Unfortunately, even though Einstein was a genius, he couldn't unite everything. You know what screwed things up for him? Quantum mechanics. Quantum world turned out to be insane. When we looked at the particles, we learned that they could do magical tricks. For example, they could be in two places at once, or disappear and reappear again out of nowhere. Einstein couldn't explain that. He wanted things to be logical and predictable, like knowing exactly where a particle is and how fast it's going. But quantum mechanics showed that our world is much more complicated, weird, and random than what we thought. But even though Einstein didn't explain absolutely everything, his legacy still lives on. Today, scientists are picking up where he left off. So how close have we gotten to the theory of everything since then? Well, quantum mechanics tried to nominate its candidate, string theory. This hero emerged in the 1980s. Quantum physics pals had a wild idea. What if the tiniest bits of everything in our world weren't particles, but super tiny strings? Yeah, like guitar strings. Almost. They look like little dots to us, which is why we see them as tiny particles. But if we looked at them under the best microscope ever, they would look like little loops. In that case, everything in the universe is made up of these little vibrating strings. Just like different notes on a guitar string make different sounds, these tiny strings can vibrate in different ways. And each way they vibrate creates a different particle. One note might give us a particle we call an electron. Another vibration could be a particle like a photon, and so on. But there is another cool idea that string theory suggests. It suggests that our universe has more than just the usual 3 dimensions we can see, like up, down, left, right, and forward and backwards. What if there are extra hidden dimensions that these strings can wiggle in? And theorists say that they might be up to 10 or even 11 of these dimensions. At first, everyone thought that this was it. This could be the theory of everything. But, just like in the movies, when everyone thinks that they've defeated the villain, more problems pop up. String theory didn't fit the universe's rules discovered by Einstein. This is the last piece of the puzzle they've been trying to find for many years. If string theory supporters figure out how to connect their ideas with Einstein's theories of relativity, they'll finally be able to explain all the things ever. And they made some attempts. String theory began to divide into many branches. For example, it gave rise to the multiverse theory. Alright, we know that all the tiny strings can vibrate and wrap in different ways. There are many ways for each string to vibrate. The combination of their vibrations give many possible results. And there are trillions upon trillions of these strings. And just like one musical note can help to create different harmonics and songs, strings can create different versions of the universe. Each version might represent a universe with its own set of physical laws and properties. You probably heard about the parallel worlds. Well, it's a real scientific concept. The multiverse theory says that our world isn't the only one. There's an infinite number of universes and their number is constantly growing. Let's say you're baking cookies. In one universe, you make chocolate chip cookies. In another universe, you make oatmeal raisin cookies. And yet, in another universe, you make them with peanut butter. Even for such a small decision, there are a lot of parallel worlds. Something like this is very hard to even imagine. And these are only those universes that are similar to ours, where identical copies of us live. Some universes might be completely different. They might have different constants of nature, like the strength of gravity or the speed of light. They might have things that we can't even think about. Of course, this is just another theory. There's still a big debate about it in the world. It's a fascinating idea, but there's no way for us to test it with our current technologies. These universes, even if they exist, are way beyond our reach. One of them is called M-theory. It was proposed in the 90s by an awesome scientist, Edward Witten. M-theory is like a super advanced version of string theory. Just like in regular string theory, it suggests that everything in the universe is made up of tiny vibrating strings. But M-theory says that these strings aren't the only things out there. There are also things called brains, short for membranes. Imagine these branes like sheets or surfaces that exist in higher dimensions. We can't see them, but they can interact with the strings in interesting ways. M-theory was basically juggling other theories, trying to solve the problem in everything. It tried to unite every version of string theory into one big idea, and also combine all this with Einstein's ideas somehow. It also high-fived Stephen Hawking's ideas about black holes along the way. But even with M-theory, we're not at the finish line. No matter how hard we try, we still can't explain absolutely everything. The biggest problem is trying to unite relativity with quantum mechanics. So far, no one could do this. These were our attempts to come up with a theory of everything so far. Will we be able to derive it one day? Who knows? There are many tricky pieces still missing, but we keep learning and creating new tools to explore our world. And maybe one day, we'll finally find out the answer. For centuries, people believed that all swans were white because that was all they had ever seen. They thought it was a universal truth. Then one day, someone discovered a black swan. It was a surprising and unexpected event because it went against what everyone believed. So yeah, the theory is named after this idea of a rare and unpredictable event that goes against our assumptions and expectations. It isn't related to the Darren Aronofsky movie. You know, the one starring Natalie Portman as a committed dancer? Nassim Nicholas Taleb is the person who named this theory. He suggested that these types of super rare and unexpected events are impossible to predict, but they can have a massive impact on individuals, businesses, and societies. The theory was originally used to explain financial markets, but has found its way into various fields. Taleb calls those extremely rare events black swans. Now, these events are so rare that the usual tools of probability and prediction, like the normal distribution, don't really work. They rely on large populations and past data, which we don't have for rare events. So, trying to use statistics based on the past won't help us predict black swans. Let's dive into some examples of past black swan events. The rise of the internet is actually a great example. It's now hard to imagine a time when people couldn't Google their burning questions or watch funny cat videos online. The internet's growth and impact caught many by surprise. It transformed the way we communicate, access information, and even buy fluffy socks without leaving the couch. A digital revolution nobody truly saw coming. Recently, we found an infant black swan on the internet. The emergence of cryptocurrencies. Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies created new forms of decentralized digital currency and disrupted traditional financial systems. Then we have the invention of smartphones. Picture a world where phones were chunky, had buttons, and only made calls. Suddenly, boom! Smartphones turned everyone into walking wizards with tiny devices in their pockets. From taking selfies to driving with GPS, these pocket-sized marvels changed the game, surprising us all with their incredible capabilities. Here we can also mention the rise of social media. The emergence of platforms like Instagram revolutionized communication, enabling people to connect and share information globally. The creation of the internal combustion engine was a game-changer too. Long ago, horses trotted along the streets, leaving a different kind of horsepower behind. But then, ta-da! The internal combustion engine roared to life, propelling cars and transforming transportation forever. Who would have thought that a mechanical contraption could replace our equine friends and pave the way for road trips and drive-thrus? What about black swans related to our bodies, like decoding DNA? Once upon a time, DNA was a mysterious code, like a secret language of life itself. Then, science unraveled its secrets, revealing the blueprint that makes us who we are. This groundbreaking discovery in genetics opened doors to medical advancements and personalized medicine. Imagine you're a scientist working in a lab. One day, you forget to clean up your petri dishes. You know, those plastic or glass things commonly used for growing microorganisms. Then, you leave for a vacation. When you return, you find a happy accident. A mold called penicillin has grown on one of the dishes and exterminated the bacteria around it. That's what happened to Alexander Fleming. This accidental encounter with mold led to the discovery of penicillin. Hello, one of the most important medications in history. At the time, bacterial infections were a major threat to human health. Fleming's chance observation opened the door to a whole new way of fighting infections and revolutionized medicine. Now let's take a peek at Europe in the 14th to 17th centuries. It was like a scene from a historical movie. People are emerging from the Dark Ages, embracing newfound knowledge and experiencing an explosion of creativity. This period is none other than the Renaissance. It's a black swan too, because during that time, there was a tremendous surge in artistic, scientific, and philosophical achievements. Incredible minds like Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Galileo were pushing the boundaries of human knowledge. The Renaissance was like a giant wake-up call for Europe, shaking off the cobwebs of the past and embracing a new way of thinking. It was a black swan event because it changed the course of history and ushered in a period of immense progress and innovation. It reminds us that sometimes, out of the blue, a wave of inspiration and brilliance can transform the world. Let's take a step back, or 1,000 steps further, and consider the moon landing. The Apollo 11 moon landing in 1969 was an extraordinary feat of human achievement and a positive black swan event. It showed humanity's potential for exploration and scientific advancement, inspiring generations and pushing the boundaries of what was deemed possible. Not all black swans are good and positive though. When it comes to the stock market, a black swan event is like a super rare market crash that goes way beyond what anyone could expect. We're talking about events that statistically should hardly ever happen. The Great Depression is a classic example of a black swan event. It happened in 1929, but its effects lasted for a long time. The economy was booming with happy days. Then, the stock market crashed and everything went haywire. It was almost impossible to predict, like trying to guess the lottery numbers but on a global scale. The world had never seen such a massive economic meltdown. At its peak, 25% of Americans found themselves without a job. The economy took a nosedive. The US GDP dropped by 30%. Over 9,000 banks waved the white flag and said, "We're out." Oh, and there's something called a gray swan event too. It's not as rare as a black swan, but it's still an outlier. The good news is that gray swans are a bit more predictable than black swans, so we can better prepare for them and take some measures to protect ourselves. Let's play a little thought game. Imagine we're weighing a bunch of people, and one of them happens to be the heaviest person in the world. Even if that person weighs 2,000 pounds, it doesn't really make a big difference in the overall average weight of everyone we weigh. It's like a drop in the bucket. This shows that extreme outliers like this super heavy person don't have a huge impact on the average. Now let's do a similar experiment, but this time with wealth. We gather a group of people, including one billionaire. What if that billionaire's wealth is 99% of the total group's wealth? Unlike the weight example here, the outlier dominates everything else. This is what Taleb calls Extremistan, where a small number of people have a huge portion of wealth, while others have very little. Taleb argues that the modern world operates more like money. It's mostly digital and not constrained by physical or biological limits. While most people don't make a lot of money, a few can make a ton. The same applies to other areas like music, book sales, and more. This winner-take-all system rewards a small number of individuals disproportionately. We tend to believe we understand why these outliers exist. We think it's all about thinking outside the box, starting a revolutionary company, and working tirelessly. But what about those people who did all these things and failed? You don't often hear about them or find shelves full of books about their failures. There's a bias in the stories we hear and the information available to us. In the end, we became more vulnerable to black swans. So, whether it's a mold leading to life-saving antibiotics or an economic crisis, these events of the black swan theory show us that unexpected events can have impacts on our lives. By the way, the odds of being born are 1 in 400 trillion. For all we know and don't know, being born is an unimaginably improbable event that nobody could have truly foreseen. So if you're alive, in a sense, you're a black swan too.
Now, if you're in an airplane soaring through the air, you may think it's the heaviest object in the sky. But those large cumulus clouds you see shaped like your dog can weigh more than 1 million pounds. Clouds are just tiny drops of water gathered up together. Don't worry, they won't come crashing down in pieces. It may seem like there are infinite stars in the Milky Way galaxy, but NASA experts are convinced that there are potentially 100 to 400 billion stars out there. There are around 3 trillion trees in the world and about 400,000 plant species. Out of all those plants, between 80,000 and 300,000 are edible, but only about 200 of those plants land in different cuisines. If you're standing in Alaska, you can expect Hawaii to inch its way to you ever so slowly. You might not feel it, but tectonic plates are always moving at the same rate as your fingernails are growing. Hawaii moves 3 inches every year because the Pacific Plate is always pushing northward. Bees buzz around with 4 wings instead of 2. The 2 wings you usually see become a single wing when they fly, but when they land and chill around, they unhook back to 4 wings. They even have an invisible chain network where they fly through to go from flower to flower. Bees can fly higher than Mount Everest, which is almost 30,000 feet high. Hurricanes can't rush across the equator because of something called the Coriolis effect, which is also responsible for many megastorms. Low pressures in the northern hemisphere rotate counterclockwise. In the southern hemisphere, it goes clockwise. So, if a hurricane swings by the equator, it won't be able to rotate. The acid inside your stomach's so strong, it can melt stainless steel. The acid inside is rocking a pH of 2 to 3 and doesn't melt your insides thanks to a stomach lining which secretes a chemical to balance it out. Your body replaces this lining every 4 days or so. Owls have something like eye tubes instead of eyeballs. Humans can turn their heads at a 180-degree angle and can rotate their eyes in multiple directions. Owls don't move their eyes freely like us, but they make up for it by turning their heads 270 degrees. They can see really well at night. Okay, chameleon, we get it. You can move your eyes independently in all directions. Please stop staring at me. If you happen to be in outer space on a planet in our solar system, then chances are you're swimming in diamonds. The atmospheres of planets like Jupiter and Saturn have high pressures that can crystallize carbon atoms and create diamonds. Scientists even claim that all that icy bling rains as much as 2 million pounds yearly in Saturn. The sun will keep getting brighter and hotter and eventually evaporate oceans, making life on Earth like an oven, similar to Venus. Our Milky Way is on its course to a collision with the Andromeda Galaxy. Stars, asteroids, planets, and moons will smash right into each other and destroy everything. Of course, something like this doesn't happen overnight, but eventually, the 2 galaxies will combine into a single mega-cluster galaxy. This won't happen for billions of years, though. I won't be around then. Slow lorises with their bugged eyes may be cute, but they're the only venomous primates in the animal kingdom. They get venom from a gland under their armpit before biting a predator. Unfortunately, their numbers are dwindling in the wild. Forests and jungles aren't the only ones responsible for producing the majority of the oxygen you breathe. It's the microscopic creatures called photoplankton that live in the upper layers of water, specifically the oceans. Like plants, they also use photosynthesis to turn sunlight into oxygen. There are so many of them that they contribute 50 to 85% of all the oxygen. Pluto was discovered in 1930, and until now hasn't even made a full rotation around the Sun. It takes Pluto 248 years to make a full orbit, which means Pluto will celebrate with fireworks and countdowns in the year 2178. There have been instances where snow was covering the sandy landscapes of the Sahara Desert, and it isn't even the largest desert on Earth. The winner in that category goes to the Antarctic polar desert. Instead of sand, it's made of frozen water. Even the Sahara receives more rainfall than the Antarctic desert. In 1933, the double eagle was a coin valued at $20. Only a few of these were released, but the trend never picked up, and so the coin was reclaimed. Some were kept, but most were destroyed. In 2002, someone bought one of these coins at an auction for $7.5 million, making it the most expensive coin ever sold at an auction. Kangaroos have a spring-like action on their legs, which makes them hop around. But it's impossible for them to do so without their tails, that act as a counterweight. These hoppers can bounce at a speed of around 15 miles per hour, and kangaroos can't hop backwards. Your favorite summer snack was invented by accident by an 11-year-old boy in 1905. Frank Epperson accidentally left soda powder and water with a wooden stick overnight and got frozen stiff. He called it the Ep cycle at first, but popsicle stuck around, and now they come in many awesome flavors. The biggest animal on Earth weighs as much as 33 elephants. Its tongue alone can be as heavy as one of those elephants. A blue whale's heart can weigh as much as a small car and needs to beat every 10 seconds. 3 big blue whales stacked head to fin are about the length of the Statue of Liberty. A human can even swim through their large veins with ease. The nano chameleon is the tiniest reptile to be discovered. In January 2021, scientists went on an expedition in northern Madagascar rainforests and found this little critter. It feeds on mites and other microscopic creatures and is a little more than half an inch long. Europa is one of Jupiter's many moons and is the closest thing scientists call our next potential home within our solar system. The surface is covered in ice, but it's believed there's an ocean underneath that could be teeming with microscopic living beings. If you're afraid of the dark, then the moon is probably no place for you. Shadows are darker on the moon than on Earth. On our blue planet, the atmosphere is able to scatter more sunlight, unlike on the moon. The people of ancient Greece and Rome used sticky spider webs as natural bandages for patients. The webbings have built-in natural chemicals that help with healing. Spider webs are so strong that 2 inches of wrapped spiderweb material can stop a plane when at landing speed. A study shows that tree shrews have a mutation in their system that makes them less sensitive to spices. They're the only known mammal, other than humans, to enjoy the flavors of mouth-burning chili foods. They did an experiment with a bunch of other mammals and found out that while the mammals avoided the spicy food, the tree shrews gobbled it down without thinking. Dolphins are one of the smartest creatures in the world, partly because they can sleep while being awake. When sleeping in the wild, their brains have to be partially on guard for any predators lurking in the water. When the heat rises in a fire, the air around it rushes to replace it, causing a spinning column to form. And that's how fire tornadoes or fire whirls are born. Octopuses may be rare to spot since they camouflage themselves so well, but they can lay more than 55,000 eggs. The mother will spend the next 6 months taking care of them, and once they hatch, they can be the size of a single rice grain. Next time you're cuddling with your cat, check out their back paws and count how many toes they have. There are 5 toes on each of their forepaws, but only 4 on their hindpaws. Scientists believe it helps them run faster or escape after plotting against you. Chow chows and some other dog breeds have bluish-purple tongues. Giraffes also have tongues of a similar color, except theirs are around 20 inches long. They use them for grabbing leaves from high branches. Next time you visit the Eiffel Tower, take a picture in the summer and the winter. If you have super bionic eyesight, then you'll notice that in the summer, the higher temperatures can make the tower grow by 6 inches. Hey, any view of the Eiffel is an eyeful. Ah, the desert welcomes you with challenging conditions of abandoned environments and extreme temperatures. Hey, some of us would prefer dessert, chocolate, over sand and rocks. Oh well. Just like cactuses and camels, buildings have had to adapt to these conditions. Here are some examples of astonishing structures in deserts. These structures are called earthships. They're located in a New Mexico desert town. A large community of like-minded people lives in them. What's even more interesting is that the location of these buildings is registered as dumpsters. Maybe it's because all these structures are made out of old tires, bottles, and cans. Earthships operate using green building principles. About 40% of a typical earthship is built with natural or recycled materials. Imagine the walls made up of hundreds of used tires packed with dirt. Then there are layers of floor-to-ceiling passive solar windows. They gather the sunlight during winter and reflect it in the summer to keep the structures at a reasonable room temperature. You can see plants in corridors and glass bottles or aluminum cans stuffed inside walls. Certainly a distinct house in many ways. Mike Reynolds is an architect who noticed the alarming waste and consumption levels in the 1970s. He designed a fully sustainable home out of cans back then. Almost 40 years later, he becomes the one who brings together all the other Earth shippers. Reynolds drove a Mercedes, but it ran off of the vegetable oil he picked up at fast food restaurants in town. A standard 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom Earthship costs about $250,000 in this town. Yet there are Earthships like Dobson House that can cost as much as $1.5 million. If you do it yourself, with family and friends, you can eliminate the cost of labor, and it becomes relatively less expensive. Let's assume you're really going to build one. Where can it be? Well, anywhere. Earthships currently fit in the cold, dry air of Canada, as well as the hot and humid climate of Haiti. This is the Mirage Mirror House. It's an installation set in the Southern California desert. Mirage opened in 2017 as part of a contemporary art exhibition. It's composed of mirrors. This minimalistic structure blends with the environment around it. The doors, windows, and openings have been removed to create an amazing experience. What you have in the landscape is reflected back to you. How's it made? With mirrored surfaces. At night, the distant lights refract from the mirrors. In the daytime, the sky is transformed into banks of clouds. There's no fixed scenery in this house. How about seeing a futuristic structure in the deep desert? Architects designed a concept home that pairs perfectly with Elon Musk's Cybertruck. The house has a post-apocalyptic theme. When I say post-apocalyptic, it's because I can't say it. Anyway, the house is designed to survive in a disaster scenario. The cyber house has steel gates, the windows are armored, and the exterior walls are made out of super strong material. Modern house is controlled by an autonomous geothermal heat pump. To put it in less sci-fi terms, you can keep the internal temperature steady. This sleek house has an entrance that can fit the Cybertruck. After all, it's inspired by it in the first place. Plus, the Cybertruck can be lifted to the second floor to be more secure. This is King Abdullah Petroleum Studies and Research Center in Saudi Arabia. Basically, it's a laboratory in a desert. It was designed to demand minimum energy. The architecture has patterns on the walls and ceilings, giving reference to the local tradition of geometric form. The next stop is Swartberg House in South Africa. This one is located near the Swartberg Mountains, but don't get too excited. It's on the edge of the Great Karoo Desert. It's a 4-bedroom apartment. It has a special temperature regulating system. The system works like a shield from the heat in the summer and as a sun trap in the winter. You're looking at the Grand Mosque of Djenné in Mali. This mosque is 52 feet tall. This is impressive because it's made of only sticks and a special mix of mud and other natural elements found in the desert. Petra is an ancient city hidden in the Jordan Desert. The structures are carved directly into red, white, and pink-colored sandstone cliff faces. It's located among the canyons and mountains near the desert. The place was a trade center many years ago. You might already see pictures of the impressive facade of the treasury. This structure still holds many mysteries in it. For starters, scientists can't explain how the Nabataeans managed to create such a structure thousands of years ago. Did you know that there's another mysterious place in the middle of the desert that has a similar structure to Petra? Madain Saleh was like a second capital of the Nabataean kingdom. Yet another secret they left for us to decipher. It has over 100 decorated tombs and more than 1,000 non-monumental graves. Plus, inscriptions and cave drawings are also here, again surrounded by sandstone. This wooden shack was a post office once. The structure is in the Tengger Desert of Mongolia. It's surrounded by nothing. Sand is the only thing that accompanies the lonely structure. The building is only 23 square inches. As you can guess, it didn't get too many visitors. It was abandoned for over 35 years. Its fate changed one day when a woman discovered the building. Mrs. Zhang and her friend came up with an idea. They were going to reach businesses and people who wanted to send letters and postcards from the world's loneliest post office without actually visiting the place. It worked. The post office rarely gets visitors in place, but it's busy online. Over 20,000 letters and postcards were sent from the Desert Post Office in December 2021 alone. The place is about 6 miles off the nearest road. A post truck picks the letters up and hits the road for delivery. Eventually, they are shipped all over the world. A second destination in Saudi Arabia is King Abdulaziz Center for World Culture. The building has an interesting design. It took nearly a decade to build this complex structure. It's a 321-foot-tall tower which stands out with its look. Stone Matters Pavilion is a stone structure in Palestine. The structure spans a surface area of 93 square inches. It has been built entirely out of 300 interlocking stones that mutually support each other. The concave roofs, and yes, they look like giant bowls, are designed that way to collect rainwater. The structure is in Iran. Interestingly, in Iran, the evaporation rate is 3 times faster than the world average, so this bowl-like design comes in very handy. It captures the water in a way that the water can form a single mass as a whole before it evaporates. The outer shell of the roof system collects rainwater, but it also works as an additional shading. It makes air move freely, designed like a cooling mechanism for both roofs. Eco Lodge in Egypt is the next stop. The project is built in a place that overlooks the desert and is constructed using locally available materials like sun-fired bricks and palm wood. The building is an example of traditional architecture. There's a water basin that lets in the air to keep the interior cool. A worthy mention is the CID Interpretation Center in Chile. Chile's Atacama Desert is among the top tourist destinations in the country. To help the tourists, architects designed a visitor center as part of the infrastructure for the wind farm. Here, the cold winter months don't freeze people because the large windows make the most of solar heating. What's even more interesting is that the building is designed to go completely dark at night. Imagine you somehow bumped into the building by accident. Black Desert House is a building respecting the stars. At night, this house goes completely dark. It dissolves into the night, so the stars can appear more prominent. Now, any mysterious desert buildings you know that aren't on this list? Let us know in the comments. Under the burning sun, among the sand dunes, somewhere in the Sahara Desert, you're walking in search of an ancient treasure. Finally, you find a strange rock in the sand. It's big, looks like a large piece of black coal or rock, but something shiny on its surface makes the rock unusual. This unique find is the oldest thing that has ever been discovered on our planet. This rock was born long before Earth appeared in outer space. The unusual meteorite was found in 2020 in a remote area of the Sahara Desert. Scientists have analyzed the isotopes of magnesium and aluminum on the stone's surface and found that its age is about 4.5 billion years. At the moment, this is the oldest sample of magma from space in history. It belongs to a small protoplanet that didn't have time to form completely. It happened a very long time ago when our solar system was forming. Many huge asteroids were floating in space. Some of them were formed into huge celestial bodies, which later became planets. The big rocky planets were absorbing the smaller ones. The rock was part of a little protoplanet that just began its formation, but another huge asteroid destroyed it. The planet shattered into billions of pieces. Some of them became part of other planets, some flew outside the solar system, and one piece that had been wandering in space until our Earth was formed. After that, it hit the planet's atmosphere and fell into the territory now known as the Sahara Desert. The rock was discovered in 2020, but the erosion of extraterrestrial rocks shows that it could have fallen much earlier. This ancient thing weighing around 70 pounds has several pieces of different meteorites inside. In simple words, it's a volcanic rock consisting of lava. It has cooled, solidified, and crystallized. That's why you notice the glitter. Scientists hope that further study of the rock will help to learn more about our solar system foundation. The biggest asteroid discovered in the U.S. is the Willamette. Its size is 84 square feet, and its weight is more than 15 tons. This is half the weight of a bus. Several people can fit on the surface of this outer space object. But the coolest thing is that it's not a rock like most meteorites that were found. Willamette is made of nickel and iron. This massive piece of metal was discovered in 1906. Now, the huge rock is kept at the American Museum of Natural History. The largest meteorite ever found is Hoba. It's located in Namibia, and people have never changed its position because it's too heavy. The weight of Hoba is 60 tons. It's heavier than a tank. The next space-related event occurred on February 28 in southwest England. On this day, a huge flash lit up the sky. Then there was a loud crash. Several residents opened the doors of their houses and noticed a black sooty spot on the lawn. They immediately guessed what had happened and reported the discovery to the British Meteorite Observation Network. If you ever find a meteorite, report it to some geological research or space center as soon as possible. The longer a space rock lies on the ground, the faster it loses its value. Rain, dust, snow, wind, scorching sun, all these factors damage the surface of the meteorite. It makes it difficult to study the celestial object. The meteorite found in England looks like coal, but it's way softer and more fragile. It most likely used to contain frozen water. The rock is part of a huge asteroid that plowed through outer space when our solar system hadn't fully formed yet. They found a unique combination of minerals inside the rock. It can help scientists learn more about the origins of the solar system and life on Earth. Now we're heading to Germany, to the small town of Nördlingen. A huge ancient meteorite's hidden here. It's very difficult to notice it unless you know the secret of this town. You're walking along the cozy little streets and looking at the buildings with beautiful architecture. You spend the whole day there and don't find anything that reminds you of a meteorite. To solve the mystery, you need to get out of town. So you climb a high hill and see that the city is located inside a pit. For a long time, locals were sure the house was located in the crater of an extinct volcano. If you look at the houses from a certain angle, you may notice an unusual shining coming from them. In the middle of the 20th century, a group of geologists came here and immediately declared that the crater doesn't look like a volcanic one. The town was built on a huge crater left by a meteorite. The huge celestial body fell here about 15 million years ago. It was so hot that the carbon bubbles inside instantly turned into small diamonds. When people were building this city, they didn't know they were using expensive stones, since the diamonds were hardly visible. The locals never attached importance to the fact that the city walls shine unusually in the sun. Now they believe this place was built from diamonds that had fallen from the sky. Our next stop is in the UK again. This time the rocks are of an earthly origin. The famous Stonehenge. People place circles of rocks here in a certain order. Everyone knows about this archaeological monument, but no one knows the reason for its creation for certain. Another construction built out of mysterious rocks was discovered just 2 miles away. It's called Superhenge. It's bigger, heavier, and takes up more space. Each plate here is 15 feet, which is about the height of 2 floors. Once, the stone stood vertically and formed a huge semicircle. But someone pushed the stones over about 4,500 years ago. It was a college prank. No, not really. That's why they couldn't be detected for a long time. Scientists still can't solve the mystery of Superhenge, but they believe the standing vertical stones were part of some huge monument. Some other amazing rocks are located in the south of Costa Rica. There are big ones, the size of a human, and there are smaller ones, the size of bowling balls. And they all have a perfectly round shape. These giant rocky spheres were created by people. It must have taken years of polishing using stone tools to get the perfect round shape. These balls are incredibly heavy, but can easily roll like a basketball. All the rocks are of a different age. Some of them were created about 2,500 years ago. Most of them are made of molten volcanic magma. Until now, scientists don't know for what purpose these stones were used. They were found in different parts of Costa Rica, near big cities. It's possible that ancient civilizations installed them specifically to show the greatness of local kings. Also, many experts believe the rocks were used as a tool for studying astronomy. The people who knew their purpose of the rocks had disappeared, and the history of the stones was lost along with them. Let's finish our journey with the coolest archaeological find. You're walking through the desert of Peru and climbing a low hill. You look down and notice the surface of the hill is covered with strange lines. You walk far away and see a huge cat on the hill. Such a drawing is called a geoglyph. Its length is around 120 feet, which is about half the size of a Boeing commercial jet. Archaeologists discovered the giant cat in 2020 and found out that it had been created somewhere between 200 and 100 BCE. This huge drawing is part of a mysterious group of different pictures. In addition to the cat, there are other animals, plants, and fantastic figures. All of them were found in the desert of Peru. The kitten was found by chance. Archaeologists didn't see it at first because natural erosion on the hillside had almost erased the silhouette.
Picture this. You're planning your dream holiday, but instead of going to a tropical beach or a bustling city, you're thinking about going to space. Imagine yourself floating, weightless, looking down at Earth from a whole new perspective. The beauty and wonder of our planet become even more evident when you're viewing it from a distance. And now, this dream can come true. Yes, you heard that right. Space tourism. Space tourism is something that has fascinated people for generations. This idea has been around for almost 20 years. We've seen it in movies and read about it in stories. But now, thanks to advancements in technology, it's finally becoming a reality. The first space tourist was a businessman named Dennis Tito. He visited the International Space Station in 2001. Sounds incredible, but here's the catch. Tito's trip cost a mind-boggling $20 million. That's a lot of money, and it made space travel seem like a dream that only the super rich could afford. And it's true that space tourism can be quite expensive. But a lot of time has passed since that day. And now, space tourism is becoming more attainable for people who aren't billionaires. Of course, the industry is still in its early stages, but the demand for it is skyrocketing, pun intended. Experts believe that it will continue to grow at an incredible rate of around 40% every year from 2023 to 2030. So, with all this in mind, let's talk about what awaits us in the near future. There are different types of space tourism. First up, we have suborbital spaceflight. It's the trip where you reach an altitude of over 300,000 feet, which is way higher than any airplane can go. In fact, it's so high that you cross a special line called the Kármán line, which marks the boundary of outer space. How cool is that? So it's basically like a quick jump into space and back. So let's talk a bit more about suborbital spaceflight. Imagine you want to go on vacation to Sydney, but you live in London. Normally, it would take you about 22 hours to get there by plane. That's a really long time to sit on a plane. But guess what? Scientists and engineers are working on a new way of traveling that could make the journey from England to Australia super fast and exciting. Suborbital space trips could be used for quick travel between different cities on Earth. Instead of flying in a regular airplane, you would hop on a spacecraft that can go really, really fast. According to a recent study, in the near future, it might be possible to fly from London to Sydney in less than 2 hours. Just imagine how amazing that would be. You would zoom up into space, see the Earth from above, then come back down in no time at all. What an adventure! This study, conducted by the UK's Civil Aviation Authority, was all about understanding how our bodies react to trips outside Earth's atmosphere. To figure this out, the researchers needed some brave volunteers. They recruited 24 healthy people between the ages of 32 and 80. These volunteers were taken to a special training facility called an RAF centrifuge in Cranwell. A centrifuge is a big machine that looks like a giant spinning chair. The volunteers were sat in there to experience a simulation of spaceflight. They were spun around, and their bodies felt the pressure and changes in gravity that happen when you go into space. Almost everyone handled the simulation pretty well and quickly returned to normal. One person even briefly lost consciousness, but it was because of the gravitational forces, and they recovered soon after. Now, this study found some surprising things. Many people think that you have to be really fit and young to handle space flights. But the research showed that older people can actually cope better with all this gravity craziness. So even if we don't develop space tourism in the next decade or two, you'll still have a chance to visit space, even when you get old. Right now, there are two big players in the suborbital spaceflight game: Virgin Galactic and Blue Origin. Both of these companies have rocket-powered systems that can take up to 6 passengers on a thrilling ride. Virgin Galactic has already had 4 successful flights, but they recently ran into some financial trouble. On the other hand, Blue Origin has flown 32 passengers on their new Shepard rocket. The catch is pretty obvious. Right now, space tourism is super expensive. Companies can charge a whopping £350,000 per seat for these flights. But don't worry, things are about to change soon. Experts believe that space tourism will grow in the coming decades. It will be kinda similar to what happened to airplanes. Right now, the cost of a quick trip to space is very high. But as time goes on, the prices will go down. Eventually, space tourism will become more affordable and accessible to people all around the world. That means not just our children, but many of us will have a chance to experience the wonders of space. As technology advances, we might even be able to plan rocket-powered holidays in the future. Can you imagine telling your friends that you went on a vacation to space? What a flex! And now, let's talk about orbital spaceflight. This is the real deal, where you get to spend more time in space. Instead of just a few minutes, you can spend anywhere from a few days to over a week up there. And we're not talking about a measly 300,000 feet anymore. We're talking about going over 1.3 million feet high. So whether you're up for a quick jump into space or a longer adventure orbiting our planet, space tourism has something for everyone. Sky is no longer the limit. But space tourism isn't all fun and games. There are some challenges we need to consider too. First off, let's talk about the environment. Launching spacecraft and rockets takes a lot of energy and can create air and noise pollution. This can seriously harm our atmosphere. We don't want to trade a cool space trip for a damaged planet, right? Next, there's the issue of safety. Space travel is still risky, and accidents can happen. Even with safety protocols in place, there's always a chance of something going wrong. And if it does, the consequences could be really, really bad. Yikes! Space debris is another concern. Every time a spacecraft is launched, it leaves behind debris that can stay in orbit for a long time. As more launches happen, the amount of debris keeps growing. This can cause problems for other spacecraft, and even small pieces of debris can cause damage. Space travel also requires a lot of resources like energy, fuel, and materials. Using up these resources too quickly could have long-term consequences for our planet and future generations. We need to make sure we're not depleting everything in our quest for space exploration. Oh, and let's not forget about all the legal stuff. The rules and regulations for space tourism are still evolving, and it's not always clear who should be responsible if something goes wrong. Plus, there are concerns about how space tourism might affect international space laws and treaties. We don't want legal chaos in the final frontier. And finally, to achieve our dream of taking spaceships like planes, we'll need better infrastructure and logistics. We'll need to build more spaceports where spaceships can take off and land. But don't worry, scientists are actively working to solve these problems. Remember, it's not just us who are excited about space tourism, even governments are joining the fun. Many countries are investing in space tourism too. It's a global phenomenon. So even though there's still a lot to develop in this industry, it's pretty obvious that the aviation industry might go through a big revolution. Traveling long distances would become much quicker and more exciting. And judging by the way development is going, the first big breakthrough in this area will be made in North America. So, get ready for a new era of travel. What an exciting time to be alive, right? The universe is calling, and it's time for us to answer. Stay tuned!
We've all heard of the Sahara. Sure you have. It's the largest hot desert on the planet. A sea of sand covering an area larger than the contiguous United States. But have you ever wondered what lies beneath the sand dunes? To answer this question, we must travel deep into the past of our blue planet. Up until some 6,000 years ago, the Sahara was grassland. Humans were around at this time, not me, spreading agriculture around the planet. In the north of Africa, the color green dominated. Plenty of rainfall meant that there were lakes, rivers, pastures, and even forests. A completely different image of the Sahara from the barren landscape of today. But then the climate started to shift. The region became parched, and the vegetation started disappearing. The wind did the rest. It took away the fine sediment after there were no plant roots to hold the ground together. Give it a couple thousands of years, and you get a familiar image of the Sahara: sand and rocks stretching as far as the eye can see. But when it comes to volume, only a quarter of the Sahara is actually sand. The yellow sands of the Sahara are just one part of the story. The desert has many other features, such as gravel plains, salt flats, and plateaus. Makes you think if we understand the word desert correctly. For people who study such terrains, geologists, there is only one condition for defining a desert: precipitation. If an area gets little or no rain, then it's considered a desert. The Sahara certainly fits the bill. Its average annual rainfall is just 3 inches. Compare that to the nearly 45 inches a year in New York. When we look at precipitation, this sandy desert is only the third largest in the world. Number 1 and 2 are Antarctica and the Arctic. They are larger than the Sahara by millions of square miles. It sounds odd, but there is more than one type of desert. The first two are polar deserts, while the Sahara is a subtropical desert. But the difference in air temperature are staggering. In Antarctica's interior, temperatures plummet to minus 76 degrees Fahrenheit. Compare that to the highest temperature on record in the Sahara of 136 degrees Fahrenheit. But this desert has a cool side. At night, the temperature is roughly the same as the average yearly temperature in Denmark. This hot and cold roller coaster makes it hard to choose the right outfit when venturing into the Sahara. And what about the sand? How deep is it actually? The depth varies between 70 and 140 feet. That's not too deep. If you put the Statue of Liberty in a tall dune, half of it would still stick out of the sand. Its vast amounts in the Sahara were created by aeolian processes. That's Greek for wind. Over time, it blows and shapes the surface of the earth. In dry areas with sparse vegetation, winds erode the ground much faster. That's what happened in North Africa. Under all that sand is the bedrock and cracked clay. If you started digging, you would find the same everywhere on the planet, with one important difference. There is some type of soil covering the bedrock. This is not the case in the Sahara. Because of the arid climate and a lack of vegetation, sand covers the ground below. Over the course of thousands of years, a lot of interesting finds ended up in the desert sand. For example, there are petrified tree trunks. These are essentially preserved prehistoric trees. They date back to the time when the region was lush green. In some places, the trees of this fossilized forest are at least 65 feet tall. The wood is so well preserved that you can still see the texture and knots. There are even fossilized pine cones. In 1992, scientists found glass fragments in eastern Sahara. These canary yellow glass shards were scattered across hundreds of miles. They didn't belong to an ancient civilization, although ancient Egyptians used them to make jewelry. In fact, the breastplate of King Tut had a beautiful scarab beetle centerpiece made from this desert glass. For a long time, scientists were puzzled about the true origins of these fragments. They finally concluded that the glass was around 29 million years old. It is an impact tape. If that sounds like it has something to do with the word impact, you are correct. These rocks are formed when a meteorite hits the surface of the Earth. This generates a lot of heat. Scientists estimate that the temperature needed to melt this mineral was close to 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Apart from the regular fine-grained sand, we also have melted sand in the Sahara. But the desert conceals other unlikely artifacts. Shark teeth are a common find in Morocco, which sits in the western part of the Sahara. What are the fossilized teeth of these marine predators doing in the middle of the desert? This part of the world looked entirely different millions of years ago. There was a sea cutting right through what is now a desert. The Trans-Saharan Seaway ran the length of present-day Algeria and Mali. It was around 165 feet deep. That was enough for all sorts of aquatic animals to inhabit it. Large catfish, sea snakes, and of course sharks lived in the area. British archaeologists even unearthed a turtle shell in Mali in the 1980s. For centuries, there was even an entire city hidden under the desert. Timgad was a Roman outpost constructed by the Emperor Trajan around the year 100 in the current era. For various reasons, its residents abandoned it around the year 700. The sands of the Sahara soon engulfed the city. It had remained hidden for nearly 1,000 years. Then, in the 1700s, a Scottish explorer started digging out the city. His team first uncovered a sandstone triumphal arch 40 feet high, similar to the ones we can see in Rome and Paris today. An amphitheater soon popped out of the sand, and it was followed by well-preserved statues of Roman emperors. The Scotsman's find was so impressive that no one believed him at first. It took 2 more centuries for archaeologists to fully excavate the city during the 1950s. The site covers a surface as large as 10 polo fields. The ruins reveal the full mastery of Roman city planning. All the streets meet at a right angle in what is known as an orthogonal grid. You can find the same layout in modern cities such as New York. Historians estimate that during its heyday, 10,000 people called Timgad home. Different nationalities lived here, from Romans to people of African descent. Today, more than 2.5 million people live in and around the Sahara. They are spread across 11 countries in total, and their living space is growing. The desert is 10% larger than it was just a century ago. This process doesn't involve sand pouring out of the Sahara. The ecosystems on the edges of the desert simply change over time. The wind blows the soil away and vegetation dwindles, the perfect conditions for the formation of a desert landscape. These changes are happening in the Sahel, a region south of the Sahara Desert. That's why the African countries have recently come together for a project called the Great Green Wall. The primary goal is to stop the desertification of the Sahel and hold back the sands of the Sahara. Their plan is ambitious and involves planting a wall of trees from the west to the east of the African continent. The proposed forest is not only going to be long, but wide as well. The Sahara and the Sahel share a historic bond. Since antiquity, camel caravans have been making the journey from Africa's Mediterranean coast in the north to the savannas in the south. The golden age of this trade kicked off in the 9th century. The perilous journey took several months to complete. The route was 2.5 times longer than the length of the Grand Canyon. Explorers still find evidence of these ancient caravans hidden away under the sands of the Sahara.
Mirror check. You've got your beige parka on, your chisel is packed, and your overnight plane ride to Saudi Arabia is booked. You know what this means, right? Unfortunately, you weren't cast in the remake of Dune. It just means that you're ready to go explore the world's largest desert areas in the hopes of uncovering prehistoric secrets about our ancestors. Let's get one thing straight. If you ever thought that deserts were empty spaces, think again. They might be filled with sand as far as the eye can see, but they also hold a lot of history, you know, because before humans settled down in cities and towns, we were nomadic people, and we traveled all around the globe looking for food, water, and shelter. So we had to come up with some interesting stuff to survive. Like this thing that was found in the desert of Saudi Arabia. Do you have any idea what this could have been? Over many years, scientists have discussed the origins and use of huge structures such as these ones. It seems our Neolithic ancestors were way smarter than we gave them credit for. They didn't spend all their hours around the fire carving weapons out of stone. No, they were also practicing their architectural skills. These huge stone structures are called desert kites, because if you look at them from a distance, well, they sort of look like kites. Archaeologists have arrived at the consensus that these kites were used to lure animals in. This way, it would make it easier for our ancestors to guarantee their week's food. But that's not all. Take a look at these monolithic structures right here. They show us that our ancestors probably drew on rocks, the blueprint of what they were going to build on the ground. Just like modern-day architects, desert kites could be miles long, so they drew out a plan before actually building them. The most surprising feature of all is that these kites were built even before things such as Stonehenge. We're talking around 7,000 to 9,000 years ago. Over the last decade, scientists have been able to identify over 6,000 desert kites spread across the Middle East and West and Central Asia. If you don't think this huge, try building something this large without the help of any drones. It looks like a pretty difficult feat to me. And apparently, Saudi Arabia's desert is filled with more amazing things. Scientists have found mysterious stone structures that are older than the pyramids of Giza in Egypt. So of course, you can't wait to go check that out. Can we all agree that carrying around heavy rocks to build a pyramid without the help of modern technology sounds absurd? I mean, how on earth did they do it? Now imagine turning back the clock about 2,000 years into the past and finding humans that built similar gigantic structures in isolated areas. Take a look at these so-called mustadels. They are rectangular structures built from piled-up stones, found over 77,000 square miles. Some archaeologists believe that these monuments were used for ritualistic purposes, maybe processions of some kind, where people would walk from one end of the plateau to the other. I'd be down for that. Now let's move on to another deserted area. We're entering the world-famous Sahara Desert landscape. Isn't it beautiful? Here, you're about to unravel an ancient mystery, something that took years for researchers to solve. Fun fact, the Sahara Desert is the world's largest hot desert. It spans over 3 million square miles, which would be like putting 1,000 times the country of Hawaii next to each other. We say it's the largest hot desert because the world's largest desert area is Antarctica. But we all know temperatures over there are freezing, not the typical image of when we think of a desert. Deep into the desert, near the Algerian town of Fogarat et Zua, something strange was found. For decades, these tiny dots appeared on images of Google Earth, but nobody could explain what they were. Some scientists were sure that these circles are the result of oil activity in the region. Others guessed that these were ancient fogaras or ancient water wells. There are dozens of them, stretching for miles and miles in a straight line. The strange thing is that they are always far away from any town, road, or human activity in general. So what was or is their purpose? If you had to take a guess, what would you say? Remember we talked about how our ancestors had to be creative in order to survive in the desert? Let's try to walk in their shoes for a minute. Imagine you're a nomadic hunter-gatherer living in a desert area. You spend your days basking in the hot sun, trying to count all the grains of sand around you. But you also need to eat and drink water. But how on earth do you get water in a desert? Sure, you can hope to keep running into oasis every week or so, but that seems a bit risky, doesn't it? That's why North African people invented the so-called fogaras. The fogaras are a 2,500-year-old irrigation system. Locals would dig deep wells in elevated areas, wells deep enough to tap into underground water. Then, they would dig parallel shafts at regular distances. This way, the water would flow from the main well down into all the shafts and irrigate entire areas. Travelers could stop by the shafts and quench their thirst. They could also raise livestock and tend to crops. Pretty clever, huh? As much as these holes did look like fogaras, a little bit of research would show you that they're not. You see, these shafts were built in a line, and not in a circular shape like the ones we're looking at now. So maybe it has something to do with the second option? Maybe these desert holes were related to oil activity in the region? Let's have a look at the holes up close and personal. From Google Earth, they don't seem that big, but in real life, they are huge craters. The tip to uncovering what they are is hidden beneath the sand. If you were one of the researchers originally uncovering the truth behind this mystery, you would have found something unique hidden in the sand. Old dynamites and vintage sardine cans. Putting the pieces of the puzzle together, scientists found that these sardine cans were a model from the 1950s and 1960s. It seems that entire teams from that decade would camp out while they surveyed the area for oil. And what about the dynamites? These were used for seismic surveying. This is an old technique, used to identify if there is oil and gas beneath the Earth's surface. Still in North Africa, you find out about another desert mystery worth exploring. Near the city of Tiaret, southwest of Algeria's capital, One runs into 13 peculiar monuments. These structures are also called Jedars, and yes, I am aware of how much that may sound like a Star Wars reference. They are pyramid-like in their shapes, and as far as scientists know, they were used as final resting places for the people who lived in the region. Can you guess who these were? Most likely the Berber nomads. And since we're talking about ancient stuff, they were probably built between the 4th and 7th centuries CE. Once scientists began to explore the insides of these monuments, they found they were pretty big inside. They found large underground vaults, chambers, and labyrinth-like corridors that gave way to over 20 compartments. It could take you up to 2 hours to walk around in them, and apparently our ancestors also used its walls to depict images of animals and hunting scenes. There's no definite proof of what these Jedars were used for, though. This is so neat, huh? I'm sure that our world's desert is filled with many more mysterious things for us to unravel. I guess I'll see you next time so that we can continue our...
You find yourself at a food fair in Iceland when you see it for the first time. Volcano bread. You eat a slice and oddly enough, it actually tastes good. Unsure of how this works, you check out the baking process. Is this kitchen really strange looking, or is it just me? The baking spot is in nature, specifically in a hot springs field. You better watch your steps so you don't get burned by the hot vapor jolting from the ground. Now, a local baker shares their traditional rye bread recipe with you. Rye flour, check. Yeast, check. You mix it all together and pour it into a metal pot. Next on the list is digging the hole where you'll place the pot to bake. You dig for about 16 inches until you can see the water bubbling from the ground. If you want to do it like a local, you'll use your finger to check the water temperature. Yikes, that's hot. Actually, the ground is heated by lava. Iceland is one of the most volcanic regions in the world, with over 30 active volcanoes at any one time. After you bury the bread in volcanic soil, you leave it there and wait 24 hours until it's ready. The next day, the bread is fully baked and super tasty. And the best part is, you just participated in an ancient Icelandic tradition. People have been doing this since at least the 1800s. Imagine it's your first day of work in a museum, and your assigned task is to clean the mask of Tutankhamun. You grab your cleaning utensils and then, oh no, this can't be happening. You just broke Tutankhamun's beard. I never wish this to happen to anyone, but this is actually a true story. Back in 2014, an employee at the Egyptian Museum knocked off the beard of Tutankhamun's mask and glued it back on, hoping no one would notice. This mask was discovered in 1922 and is considered one of the 10 symbols of our human civilization. Oh, and the best part of this story? It took historians until 2016 to discover the poor glue job. So, if you visited the museum between 2004 and 2016, maybe you saw the glued beard. If I say Sahara, what comes to mind? An infinite desert landscape, right? Well, according to scientists, the Sahara isn't always a desert. From time to time, it becomes green. But you probably won't be seeing this in your lifetime. Every 10,000 years, the Sahara lives through a humid period, where the sand gives way to lush green vegetation and sparkling lakes. This happens due to a tilt in the Earth's axis, which affects different weather patterns around the globe. Can you imagine the Sphinx surrounded by rainforest? It's mind-blowing. And speaking of the Sahara, say you traveled back to 1800 BCE. If you timed it right, you might get to see the construction of the so-called Black Pyramid in the city of Dashur. These are not the famous Giza pyramids, but they serve the similar purpose of being a final resting place. In 1892, archaeologists excavating the area found an important part of the Black Pyramid that was lost for centuries. The benben, also called a pyramidion, was the tip of ancient Egyptian pyramids. A benben consists of a solid block, usually made of limestone. Most of them were covered with gold and reflected the first rays of light from the sun every day. Can anyone get me a time machine, please? Remember when you ate something really spicy, your cheeks turned red? Apparently, that can happen to birds too. For example, canaries can change colors after eating peppers. These birds have a special pigment that allows them to switch shades depending on their diet. So, if a yellow canary eats red peppers, it can turn orange or red. Can rocks move on the ground on their own? Well, you might be under that impression if you visit Racetrack Playa in California. The site is a dry lake bed and home to one of the world's strangest phenomena, the so-called sailing stones. Think 100-pound rocks moving around alone, leaving behind trails as long as 1,500 feet. They were discovered in the 1900s, and until recently, no one was lucky enough to be on the site while they were moving. It was only in 2014, after much observation and research, that scientists solved this mystery. The sailing stones appeared because of the perfect balance between wind, ice, and water. When it rains, the water that falls on the ground freezes and forms a coat of ice above the ground. If it's windy, the rocks are easily pushed around, sailing along the lake bed. But hey, if you ever visit Racetrack Playa, don't disturb the rocks. On the western coast of France, you'll find the vacation hotspot known as the island of Ré. It attracts tourists looking for scenic landscapes and beautiful beaches, but that's not all it's famous for. There, an extraordinary phenomenon occurs when two different wave patterns collide with each other, something called a cross sea. It's almost as if the sea were a checkerboard, divided into hundreds of squares. And no, it's not an optical illusion. A cross sea only happens in places where different quality waters meet. For a tourist to see the cross sea in Ré, this probably means that there was a storm in a different sea nearby. This stormy water travels with the help of currents and meets the water of Ré, creating these oddly shaped riptides. Oh, and apart from this island and Israel, there's nowhere else in the world where you could see such a thing. The following sight will either give you goosebumps or make you marvel at its weirdness. I'd say it depends on the time of day you visit. Next to the small town of Gryfina in Poland, you'll find a very unusual sight, a pine tree forest where each tree is bent at its base. If you visit during the daytime, I guess you'll be fascinated by these trees' sharp 90-degree curves. You can even use their trunks as a stool if you decide to have a picnic, for example. But visiting the site at night will most likely give you chills. A thin layer of fog hovers around, making the forest seem quite unwelcoming. Scientists still can't explain why the trees are the way they are. So, are you a daytime or nighttime visitor? You went for a hike and suddenly encountered a big cloud of fog. This may ruin your photo ops, but there's one thing you can hope for. Foggy days are the perfect conditions for a phenomenon called fog bow, otherwise known as a white rainbow. This happens because of numerous tiny water droplets that cause fog, smaller than 0.002 inches. So, instead of the multicolored bow, you get a transparent one, with red outer edges and a bluish inner edge. Now, say you're roaming in a little town in Europe, appreciating the century-old buildings and good summer weather. You feel hungry and decide to type into your Google Maps the name of that restaurant your friend recommended. Ah, it's only 10 minutes away by foot. You follow the blue dot on your GPS and arrive at your destination, quick and easy. We all love this free piece of technology, don't we? But what if I told you that the US spends over $2 million daily to maintain the satellites to make it work? Yep, that's the price. And to implement it, they spent over $12 billion US. Have you ever heard of something called a natural snowball? This could be proof that nature is really perfect. In 2016, the beaches of the Gulf of Ob in northwest Siberia were filled with rows of giant snowballs. Think balls measuring up to 3 feet across. This rare, yet beautiful natural phenomenon happens when small pieces of ice are rolled by strong winds and water. The further they roll, the more ice they gather, and the more that ice is polished. They end up as giant, perfectly shaped snowballs. They look pretty amazing on their own, but it's quite a sight when hundreds of them are together.